Behind every amazing flavor is an amazing human who has perfected their craft. Welcome to Flavors Unknown, a behind-the-scenes look at new flavors and the chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders who create them, with your host, Emmanuel.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast Flavors Unknown. I am your host, Emmanuel Laroche. I have been in the food industry for more than 20 years, both in Europe and here in the US. And every other week, I interview trending chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders around the US to discover their secrets behind the scenes, share with you new exciting locations, and find out which new flavors and ingredients they are experimenting with. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the show. Last week, my guests were the chefs couple Sayat and Laura Azilmaz from Noosh, the new Eastern Mediterranean restaurant in San Francisco. You can find the show notes of this episode and all previous episodes at flavorsunknown.com. Click on the episode page. If you are on Facebook or Instagram, you can follow us at Flavors Unknown. Be sure to listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or other phone podcast apps. Please subscribe to the show as you do not want to miss future great episodes that are coming soon. Today, Flavors Unknown is featuring a special episode focusing on bourbon. My guest is Flavien Desoblin, who owns 2 bars in Manhattan, the famous Brandy Library and Tribeca, and Cooper and Oak on the Lower East Side. Both of them have one of the most comprehensive collection of brandies and whiskey in the world. He is a true expert in distilled spirits. This is a rather long episode, I have to alert you, compared to the other ones that I had before, as Flavien shares rich and excellent content, and we are both individuals really passionate about bourbon. Hi, Flavien. How are you?
Well, so far, so good.
So far, so good. So welcome to Flavors Unknown. I am really, I have to say, super excited to have you, on the show. I have to say for 2 main reasons. The first one, we know a little bit each other, and I really consider you to be like a true expert, in the spirit world. And the second reason is because the Brandy Library is, I have to say, my favorite place in Manhattan to relax, when discovering incredible bourbon and, of course, other, spirits. So each time, I enter the place, I forgot everything about everything else. It's really a special place to me.
Well, perfect. Thank you very much. I'm glad you can leave all your headaches and everything else behind when you walk in. That's the whole point. So I like to hear this, and thank you so much for inviting me to be over. That's really, really nice.
You're welcome.
It's all about flavors in our lives. It's true.
Yeah.
And there's so much that we don't understand that I like the investigation part of it. So thank you.
So Flavien, so you are the owner, of this great space, and you have created it. What was your inspiration, behind the creation of the Brandy Library?
I have a background of wine and spirits, both business and making it. I learned how to make wine. I learned about tasting properly wine and learning about wine and vinification and vineyard management and all this. But besides a natural passion because of my background, my upbringing with wine growers, being friends of the family and visiting the cellars that my dad loved so much and enjoying the great dishes that my mom used to cook, naturally I was drawn to wine and spirits, right, in general. But there's something a little more simple than that, and I came to the US in 2000. And
because you are born in Burgundy, France, correct?
I am a Burgundian, yes, indeed, and I actually feel sorry on a regular basis that we don't make amazing spirits. There are some great Mar de Bourgogne, but so far there isn't much whiskey or other very fine spirits being made in Burgundy. It's the land of wine and great wines and so I enjoy it very much. But for spirits, I saw right away in New York that customers or patrons in the bars and restaurants I worked at could drink quite a bit of them and always paying attention, meaning not drinking it and being drunk. They could still make sense. They could consume quite a bit, but this American mind of curiosity, the investigation of the fancy drinks, it seems to be a second nature in Yorkers, at least I know about New York. And I figured, well, I believe that wine bars have been covered and they're doing pretty well. So I love spirits. Why don't I specialize in spirits, and I can bring a knowledgeable service in a bar that I would create that would be about fine spirits. So that was it. I was extremely lucky to meet the right people who could help me find the money to open the bar. And I'm one of those very few people who can say that their dream came true. And that was it. And in 2003, I signed the lease. And in 2004, in just about exactly 15 years ago, I could open Brandy Library after quite a few months of construction, of building and all of this. So I'm a happy individual 15 years later.
So I have a listener from, the podcast that knew that I will have an interview with you that was scheduled. So his name is Michael, and he wants, to ask you the following question is, what is the mission of the Brandy Library?
I mean, the very core mission is to give the letters of character back to spirits. Unfortunately, to too many people out there, strong alcohol is just hard liquor instead of being a liquid that is packed with flavors that is complex and rich, right? We tend to think of fancy wines as very much conveying the message of pleasure and intellectual moments or nostalgia or reflection. And spirits are normally, at least by most, not understood as being too noble. So the very sole purpose of Brandy Library is to showing our customers, whoever wants to listen, that this dedicated spirit, whether it is cognac or bourbon or tequila, is made by real people, first of all, with an amazing tradition, usually a great deal of heritage. And there is so much care into the process, into the making of the spirits, and wherever they're made from, that they definitely deserve attention. And then, should we pay that a little bit of attention, we discover a whole world of flavors. That was it. That was really the very first purpose of Brandy Library. And is it because it's been 15 years, or is it because, well, the world has changed, and generally speaking, people pay a lot more attention to fine spirits, whether they come from Mexico or South Africa, from Japan or Ireland. I believe that finally the world is understanding that it's not just hard liquor, but a lot more a great product made by people, for people, and that can be so rich that they are truly life enhancers.
Let's talk about bourbon. That I really, love, that spirit. Let's focus on it for a while because, with your expertise, we can talk about any of the spirits, but I don't have enough hours, to cover it. So maybe I have to have you another time to talk, about gin or whiskey or Scotch, I would say, and so on. So I believe I know the answer of this question because that I'm going to ask you, as I attended several of your classes, at the Brandy Library. So how does the name Bourbon come from?
Nobody knows for sure. We can just venture and say, well, no matter what, there's a French influence in that. Whether it was named Bourbon and there was a specific type of whiskey, it was just a better whiskey by the Tarascon brothers, and commercially speaking, they had to differentiate, and commercially speaking, they had to differentiate themselves. They thought that they were selling a better product, a whiskey that was not as harsh as the otherwise rye-based whiskeys that everybody else was selling. Was it because there was corn as the base of it, or because they were actually used to age their bourbon for a smoother taste, a rounder taste, so to speak, because of their French origins? Or whether it originated from Bourbon County, over what was one part of the newly created state of Kentucky, and there was that part of Virginia was the Kentucky District of Virginia. There was this distribution carving of this Kentucky District in 1780 with Fayette County. Later on, in 1785, you find yourself with that new city port of Maysville that happens to become very quickly a hub for goods going down south. By then everything is in barrels, whether you're talking about nails or smoked fish, molasses, and of course whiskey. So whiskey is made around that Maysville area, and you'll be in Kentucky in 1792, the state. But right now you've got that whiskey that happens to be on those flatboats and later on the steamboats, and going down and finding those cities of down south. You can imagine that this little bit of a travel with swinging temperatures and levels of humidity force the whiskey in and out of the barrel. You've got this interaction of the whiskey and the wood, and therefore when the whiskey gets down there, it does find an appreciation amongst the fine palates. And all of a sudden, whereas everybody else was used to rye whiskey, well, now they're getting that whiskey coming from and stamped with the origin of its creation, or at least its shipping, with Bourbon County. Old Bourbon whiskey. Later on, when Maysville is not part of that Bourbon area anymore, it doesn't matter. It's that old style, old Bourbon, and therefore those barrels being stamped with old Bourbon are this sign of a different quality of whiskey. Because it's corn as the base, it's not as spicy. And because there is some sort of a maturation, unwilling maturation, I guess, it becomes rounder. The wood has been extracted, its sugars, and of course a bit of color, and definitely it does resonate with the French population down there. So it becomes something a bit fancy, and it's easier drinking.
Let's stay on the bourbon, for a bit. So definition, straight bourbon need to be 51% of corn, contains, other cereal like rye, malted barley, sometimes wheat. There's been aged like 2 years, correct, in charred and new oak barrels. Doesn't have to be from Kentucky, correct?
It doesn't have to be from Kentucky. It's one of those misconceptions. It so happens that history has called Kentucky its home when making bourbon, really, because of the natural growing of corn there, and because it became a hub for distribution of different parts of the United States. But straight has to be 2-year-old, and if it's under 4, you've got to stipulate this on the label, right? So most big bourbons are just 4 years and 1 day, when you're not going to find those bourbons for a very high price, and there's no age statement whatsoever. If it says straight bourbon, then you can tell it's 4 years and 1 day. A few brands will find their sweet spot between, say, 5 and 7. Maker's Mark happens to be right there, and there's no age statement for Maker's Mark, but we know it's right there, 6, 7, 8 years of age. For other brands, 8 years is just very old, and now we've got the trend of putting a much higher age statement on bourbons. It sells, and bourbon is a collectible. But what I'm trying to say here is that most bourbons, a good 90% of the bourbon that is sold throughout the world is just about 4 years and 1 day. And yes, of course, most of it comes from Kentucky. It's well over 90%. I believe we're at 93 or 94% bourbon being made in Kentucky.
Is it a special reason why Kentucky it's ideal, for bourbon whiskey production?
The bourbon producers have always touted the very benefits of that limestone filtered water, and that happens to be right for fermentations. Is it that simple? I'm not sure. I think the weather being not extreme, but offering great deals of temperature variations and humidity levels. Does offer a speed aging of sorts if you want to compare to Scotland or say Ireland or the northern part of Japan, or not to go so far, just about Canada. Whiskies do not mature this fast in those countries. So you could be upstate New York and have a bourbon that will age fast, but that's really only if you use small barrels or if you climate control your warehouse or your rake house. Down over in Kentucky, those huge rake houses will be exposed to those temperature variations. And remember, some are in the plains, some are right by the river, and they've got more humidity than the ones that are on top of the hill, which also show a lot more sunlight. And there is a difference, of course, between a warehouse made of bricks and cement and one made of wood and another that is just wood plus metal sheets for roof and walls. So you'll have a breathing whiskey within, and Kentucky, but we can throw Tennessee right there, and we can throw Texas and Colorado as well. Those are states where you can find great temperature variations. It is ideal if you want to extract a lot of the wood compounds, and it's ideal if you can market your whiskey just a bit sooner. And there is a great benefit of long aging with less temperature variations. As we know that 25-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey usually shows a great deal of complexity. But in Kentucky, really, most people are happy with the younger whiskeys, and for a good reason. You can get to much too high extraction of the wood compounds that damage the whiskey. So older is not always better, that's for sure. But yes, is it the truth?
Yeah, but you say that, but at the same time, we see now the trend. I mean, we see a lot of whiskey. I mean, of course, there's Pappy Van Winkle, but there's Rhetoric, and there's some Elijah Craig or Evan Williams that are like 23, years old. So you said not, older is not better, but so what do you think about those ones?
Well, they happen to be really good, but it's a little difficult to judge honestly. Very simply because yes, you're getting a depth, a richness, a complexity with say those Pappy Van Winkle 20-year-old or the Evan Williams 23, or the Elijah Craig 18, 21, 23. But most people actually don't really like them. And in blind tastings, they'll tell you it's just too much. It's too woody. You feel like it's just an extraction of wood compounds. So when you're drinking something this old, you switch your brain into more of a contemplative mode. And therefore you pay more attention and your brain is trying to decipher all these aromas and flavors, and you're naturally inclined to appreciate it more, to like it more, right? In a blind tasting, I know that quite a few people are surprised by, for example, the first whiffs of a very old bourbon that will be showing some nail polish remover notes. And we know by experience that this is the sign of maybe greatness that lies within, and we've got to pay more attention, and it needs to be exposed to air a little bit, and it will change. And yes, indeed, it changes, and it's super rich. But there is a reality, the business reality of this is that it's only out there to satisfy the geeks and the collectors and to keep the name bourbon being pronounced so loud and clear that the whole category benefits from this. But the very true reality of this is that very few bourbons can reach that age. As a matter of fact, past 15 years, chances are you don't have much left in your barrel if that barrel was on top floors of the rick house in Kentucky, right? I remember a few years ago when we went, and those were the good days. We went to pick an Elijah Craig 18-year-old private barrel for Brandy Library, and we tasted out of 6 barrels, and those barrels had been taken down already 3 or 4 years before from the very top floor into middle floor of the rick house, and they were just absolutely stunning. By the time it was bottled, it was a 20-year-old bourbon that we had picked, and absolutely stunning for sure. But then, when you talk about this with the guys who let you taste and explain how it works, they tell you it's just one out of maybe 50 barrels that get to still have about half in it. And we had somewhere between a third to half of the barrel left after the 20 years of maturation. Now,
that's a lot for the angels.
That's a lot for those angels. They're really thirsty angels. But we were just very lucky that the barrel itself had been almost by mistake very well made. And I'll explain in a second. American oak is traditionally not split like European oak species here in the U.S. And it's a big industry. What I'm trying to say here is that a typical large scale cooperage in the U.S. will make between 1,500 to 2,500 barrels a day. The trees are not seasoned for between 2 to 4 years like in Europe. The planks are just kiln dried, and whether it lasts a month or 3, it's just to get the moisture out of the future staves, out of those planks they make from the tree, right? Then it's made in 2 barrels pretty quickly, of course, before being released out to the producer. It will be tested with a bit of water, and they put pressure in the barrel so that they see water coming out of the pores of the wood if there is a leak, right? And they fix it right there. But it's a quick fix, and they don't always see the leak. So it's been a traditional job of being a barrel fixer. Those guys who go to the rig.
So at the distilleries? Or
at the distilleries within the aging compounds of those distilleries. It's a job that actually is disappearing because cooperages have learned to pay more attention, and there's a bit more of a scientific way to make a barrel right now. And therefore, faulty staves are discarded before they enter the making of one barrel. Nonetheless, it hasn't been always like this. And the old-timers do lament the fact that maybe the old way of making bourbon, in those barrels that were leaking, we're producing better bourbon. But, we always tend to think much higher of things of the past. I'm not sure if this is true or not. I've tasted a lot of bourbons that were very old, and yes, they were really good. Was it just my brain playing tricks on? I find the bourbons made today absolutely outstanding. There is a natural phenomenon occurring, right? So, of course, you lose a lot with evaporation because it's a porous material, and it breathes because of the temperature variations, levels of humidity, and also atmospheric pressure. But there is that problem of the leaks, and there is the wood that tries to seal itself. And there's a production of sap, and just like your body after a scratch is healing as quick as possible, well, the wood does the same. And, it's a living thing. It's not just because it's breathing, but those wood compounds are right there, and they're trying to heal itself. The barrel is trying to heal itself. So when you go and you see a barrel that was leaking, and you see this almost resinous, oozing liquid, and you finger on it, and it's kind of sweet, and it's also a little bitter. That was just the barrel trying to fight that leak. And
sure, but that taste somehow impact as well the liquid inside, right?
They will all tell you that it doesn't, but
really?
I'm pretty sure it does. I am pretty sure it does, for the very simple reason that a barrel filled the same day as another with the same white dog and placed on the very same floor, same location of the rig house. One shows a few leaks and another has none, and the whiskey inside will taste different. Now, of course, purists will tell you that it might also depend on where the staves were taken from. Was it from the same tree? Where the tree grown? Did the tree get exposed to a few fast spring growing seasons? Or on the contrary, did it come from the north facing slope of Missouri, the Ozarks in Missouri? There is an origin of the barrel that we will be discovering, and I'm saying will because so far Buffalo Trace is the one that's been leading the research into the wood and trying to understand where are all these flavors coming from, right?
But that's amazing when you're talking about this, and, with all those variation that can impact, the wood itself that goes into the barrel. So, but when we look at a higher level and all the different phases of making a bourbon, what do you think has the most impact on the final taste of the liquid? Is it like the mash bill? Is it the yeast that those companies are using? Is it the aging in the barrels that we are talking about, like the barrel itself? And then now even we can talk about like the different finishes that, from different, cask that's becoming very popular. So when you look at all of this, I mean, all of them contributes, but there's one that has more impact than the other.
You're right. There are so many elements that do contribute to the final overall flavor profile of a bourbon, right? But no matter what, we are either pleased or put off right away when we put a bourbon in our mouth by its sweetness and its richness combined with its spiciness or smokiness, right? Yes, bourbon is sweet. That's because there's a lot of sugar extractions. Remember that oak sugars, those different sugars that are in the oak right there will be extracted during maturation. The fact that this is a brand new charred oak barrel means that there will be an almost overwhelming extraction of the wood compounds. So no matter what, this is the number one, right? You'll get the vanilla and the coconut and the sugars.
So the impact of the season with the winter and the summer and the woods, expanding and contracting, all of this is going to, for you, contribute the most, on the final taste.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting to know that a few craft distillers are paying attention to the very origin of the tree. Now, we always say that American oak is a lot easier to deal with than European oak species. And when I say American oak, I mean we've got to be careful with the term of white oak, right? Because all of these oak species, even the ones over in, say, in Gascony that we call black oak, it's really all part of the white oak species. And all of these white oak species that are used here in the U.S., and 45% of that is Quercus alba, which does translate, if you remember your Latin, into white oak. But Quercus alba is only one of them. It represents almost half of the inventory of white oak that we're using in the U.S., and not just for barrels, right? For barrels as well. But you have Quercus lirata and Quercus durandii and Quercus macrocarpa and so on. But even if we stick to that Quercus alba, whether it is grown in the forest of Virginia or in the Ozarks, and where in the Ozarks, and it's not just that. It's not just the growing, the seasonal changes at stake in those forests. It's the fact that maybe the tree had to fight a louse or another. We say that there are less tannins than in European oak species. However, you still have tannins, and those tannins may have been produced in greater amounts in that tree, by that tree, because it had to fight some insects. Let's remember that tannins are just a natural defense mechanism that kingdom of plants and vegetables, think of fruits, and many trees do develop to an extreme or not, depending on what it is exposed to. If it does need to fight, it will produce more. Now, at the end of the day, the tannins that are in the oak will be extracted by the whiskey during maturation if you get too long of a maturation. And that's why those whiskey barrels that stay up there on the top floors of the rickhouse will be exposed to the dangers of not only the super thirsty angels and the leaking, just the physical leaking out of the barrels because of the pressure. It goes from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. A 50-gallon or say a 55-gallon capacity barrel over in Kentucky will see its, say, 48 or 50 gallons present inside the barrel grow over 2 gallons in volume, right? So you've got a tremendous expansion and retraction, therefore, when the temperatures go down, going on during aging. But it also means that if you do leave that pappy in the barrel for 23 years, maybe it will go to that level of over-extraction of the wood compounds, and some of those wood compounds will be the tannins. And those will be giving you some astringency, some bitterness even. it wouldn't take that long for, say, a French oak barrel to give these notes to the bourbon. But an American oak takes that long because it's got just about 9 to 10 times less tannins than European oak species. But nonetheless, it does happen. So there's a danger there. And some people say, well, I don't understand why bourbon is so smoky. Well, you do extract some smoky notes as well, just like you would extract tannins. Now, you may find a bourbon that has become extremely fruity and just super delightful, but maybe this is because your palate can also take the tannins. Maybe because you've been exposing your palate to the fancy tannins of so many red wines, and you're used to it. But for taste buds that are not used to tannins, to its astringency and giving you that factory effect, well, or just about any young person, as a matter of fact, and not used to appreciate this, and it could be a bit frightening.
What does bottle in bond means?
This bottle in bond is really cool, as a matter of fact. When you see that on the label of a craft distiller, it's a real sign of achievement, as a matter of fact, because it means that those small producers have got that very difficult decision to make, whether they're going to be using very small barrels for 3 months or they're going to be keeping their whiskey for so long, 4 years. It's a long time for a small producer, just because they want to get to that level of quality. It's a seal of quality. Really, that's all it is. But I'm very happy to see this back on the market. There are some big producers who never really stopped making a bottled in bond, just because they thought it was a cool nod to the past. And I'm very happy to see those new small producers who embracing this old technique. It says, I've taken my time, I've cared for this whiskey in the barrel, I've watched over its maturation, and it was not just aging, it was maturation, and now it's ready. Now it got to the adult age, right? 4 years is sort of adult age. Young adult, but adult age for whiskey. So you find rye, you find bourbons. What it gives you is that 100 proof. It means, you're getting the real deal. It has not been cut with so much water, right? From the aging conditions, it could have been that the whiskey at the term of those 4 years was 130 proof, was maybe 115. Could have been higher, but given the fact that by law, you cannot barrel the whiskey, the onset of maturation over 125 proof, if you find yourself at 145 proof, well, that's because it's been a few years, right, on essentially the top floors of the rickhouse. But say if you barreled at 125 proof, that legal maximum, 4 years later, and especially if you've kept this whiskey on the bottom floors of the house, maybe it's going to be at 120, 115, and therefore you only dilute it to 100 if you want to release it at 100 proof, right? But
okay, before bottling.
Before bottling, thank you. Yeah, increasingly, this reduction is not taking place, or is not taking place in huge amounts. Back in the old days, it seems that a common practice for barreling the whiskey was more around 110, 115, and it sort of naturally go down to 100, so that there would be very little manipulation. And when I say manipulation, I mean reduction with water before bottling. So it's really also some sort of a bourbon as natural as it gets, right? So of course, if you're a novice, if you're not used to that packed with flavor whiskey, and especially that bottled in bond that gives you 100 proof, well, it could be a bit of a surprise, if not a shock to your taste buds. At the end of the day, if you're a connoisseur, you appreciate this because it's packed with more flavors.
But so it's interesting here. You're talking about the proof level, and then this idea that you're adding water before bottling, which is probably easier as well for the people drinking it, and it's probably for the flavor experience when you taste the product. So is it like the same principle? In fact, when for some of the bourbon, that we find with a higher proof, then to really appreciate it, people are either adding maybe an ice cube, like a big ice cubes, or like drops, of water, in order to open and to reduce first the level of alcohol a little bit, and then to drop it a little bit, and then to make sure that you can really appreciate the liquid even more.
It's a bit of a delicate point here because I might have a strong opinion on this.
Okay, go ahead.
I do believe that we have to bring them. I do believe that we have to bring ourselves to the point of being able to decipher, gauge, analyze if needed, but certainly appreciate the whiskey the way it is released. There is a reason why those distillers do it. It is the very purest expression of their craft. Maybe it is the more direct link between the soil, and I'm going to an extreme here, between the soil where that corn or rye or barley was grown, or wheat, and the forest where the trees were taken to make barrels with, to your very taste buds. It's just the product as it was at the end of maturation. And the warehouse manager will think, well, you know what, for the flavor profile of this particular mark, particular brand, within the line of my offerings, this is
the way I want it. Sure.
At its best. And clearly marketing is right there behind saying, well, you don't want to go that far. And then should we really be that much of a purist here? And you find the people who do sell the whiskey, and even master blenders and people in charge of warehousing and selecting the barrels, that will tell you, well, we give it to you at its most natural proof, cask strength or barrel proof as they call it, because we want you to be your own master and add the water you want, because it's a very personal thing. And granted, it is a personal thing.
But your recommendation is drink it neat.
No matter what, try it first. Exactly, because it's, your friend that you're having it with will have it at its best with 3 drops of water. You'll need to put just about a 50% water in it. It's very different. We are all so different in terms of nose and palate preferences. We all have a different childhood. If you grew up in parts of Germany or in parts of France or Italy, you will have been more exposed to the bitter, to the astringent, from licorice to aniseed and very tart, maybe acidic foods, certainly not as sweet as most parts of the U.S., for example. So it's all about what your childhood was about, what you were exposed when you were younger, and also very simply what your last, say, 2, 3, 5, 10 years of eating and drinking have been about. If you found yourself in the liking of fancy red wine, naturally you're looking for the drier style, and you don't mind the tannins, and you appreciate the structure that the tannins will give to the red wine. It's the same thing for spirits. So there's a big danger here in saying, well, you really want to have it at cask strength because it's the pure stuff, and just add water because it will open it up. It will not always open it up. It will show you maybe right off the bat pleasant notes, but in the meantime, it will also mask a lot of complexity. And should you actually take the time, should you be in contemplation, so to speak, rather than in a rush to drink it, then you'll see that the whiskey will expose itself to you. Just give it an hour. Pour yourself a good 2 ounces in a big glass or a tulip glass, whichever fancy you want it to be, and be in a discovery mode. This is when your brain is going to work. If you want an immediate satisfaction, then you should not even bother with the super high strength and add a lot of water, because chances are you will be annihilating, you will be killing so much of that whiskey. Again, water can open it up. It can also shut it off completely. And it's very difficult to just overcome this overwhelming amount of water. Now, some will tell you that you can just add straight from the bottle. You can add to it, right? But some people actually put water in a glass and then pour the whiskey. And taking time, then you just pour more whiskey and you see what it does on your palate. Ice, you know what I feel about ice.
Yes,
it's a killer, but it's also needed. We don't have to be intellectuals or at least not all the time, when we drink bourbon, when we drink any spirit. And it should remain a product for enjoyment and relaxation and a good time with friend or on your own. There's no shame to this. Only sometimes we have drinks with a societal pressure. We're within groups, whether colleagues or friends. And, just dropping an ice cube on many bourbons doesn't hurt the bourbon, because that bourbon it maybe is not that complex, and it was made so that it can take the ice, right? And ice, drop of temperature, it also means reduction, watering it down a bit. But there's no problem if you're going to drink it in 10 minutes. Why not? And especially if it's a small amount, there's no problem with it. It's just you cannot apply those rules to all bourbons. You've got to think twice.
So I would like to come back to aging and this situation of the techniques of like the barrel, moving the barrel in the rick house, and then there's another technique that we have heard about, and it's even some distillers are putting this on their bottle. It's the Solera technique. So can you talk to us a little bit like the difference between the two?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, here's what's happening with the moving of the barrels. You're just provoking a bit more of rolling and rocking of the whiskey within the barrel, and so you're forcing the whiskey deeper into the pores of the wood. So naturally, the maturation will be faster. This is not always why barrels are moved around, right? And full disclosure, very few barrels aging bourbon will be moved around during aging time, during maturation. Very few. A couple of commercial ones will be very proud to tell you so. And what they tell you is that they want all conditions to be presiding over the maturation of the bourbon. In other words, when they'll be bottling that bourbon, they will want that bourbon to be to have been exposed to the high humidity and the lower temperature, and also the very drastic temperature swings, the high and the lows of temperatures, and so on. Okay. This is extremely difficult to do because it costs money. And bourbon is traditionally not a product that has been pricey, right? So the idea there is that they wouldn't have to do too much of a blending. And we know that Maker's Mark does that. We know Woodford Reserve does that a bit. A few craft distillers will do this. It's extremely time consuming. It's energy. It's money. And I don't want to say that this is wasted, but traditionally, the way consistency has been achieved is not this way. Consistency is just blending the contents of 1,000 barrels or just a dozen barrels that were taken out of different warehouses, different rick houses, different floors, different locations within each floor. Corner barrels exposed to sunlight and to airflow, or the ones right there in the middle, those honey barrels on the middle floors, the ones on the very top that are suffering those great temperature swings. And this is the right way to achieve consistency. And then let's face it, we're in 2019, approaching 2020. Science has come to the rescue of bourbon making. There is an analysis of that vetting of so many barrels in that big tank that will tell you, okay, yeah, you do have the flavor profile of the mark you usually put on the market, or you don't. And if you're missing some caramel notes and some coconut notes, well, you know that these barrels over there for the coconut will be giving you more of the lactones during extraction than those other barrels. So you go and fetch a few barrels in that particular rick house that will give you that flavor profile, and then you achieve that consistency. So the moving of the barrels, it makes sense, all right, but there's on top of the cost, the labor cost, the time, the energy, the fuel, and all of that is needed to do so. there is also a much greater angel share going on, because you shake the barrel around when you move it, right? And which means you're wetting that headspace, that top part of the barrel, when it was resting right there, that had become somewhat dry. Well, then again, you're wetting it. This is going to evaporate so quickly. So you're losing a lot more when you do this. Now, of course, you can turn it into a marketing advantage and say, well, yeah, of course, we don't age our whiskey for that long, but there's so much care, so much intervention, and so much of an angel share that it should be sold at a higher price.
So let's talk about the Solera.
The Solera. So Solera is something quite new in the US, right? It's a very old technique that we can trace back, not just in Spain, but other parts of Europe. And you could also find some sort of Solera systems in most wine countries with a very old tradition of making wine. It's very simply put, you're mixing the young stuff with the old stuff for speeding of maturation. So when it comes to whiskey, the craft movement has learned to differentiate itself from the big guys. The big guys wouldn't bother with Solera systems, but the small ones could be putting, say, 20, 30, 40 barrels together, and with a careful extraction of the whiskey from the bottom barrels and compensation from the upper layers of barrels with the white dog or the younger stuff, it could be interesting. It's all about the mingling of the molecules. The ones that were just created with that spirit, with the ones that have been within the wood already for a while. The Spanish Solera system is what in the US we got inspired by. This is very simply, that typical 3 layers of barrel system, whereby when you're ready to bottle that Vino de Jerez, that sherry wine, you're taking out of the bottom barrels, and you make up for that loss with extracting some sherry from the layer of barrels right above, and having done so, you have to do the very same thing from the top layer barrels. And it has been proven that this is a faster way of aging.
Do you see more of this being done?
I see more of this. Say 10 years ago, nobody was doing it. Late friend and craft movement brain, Dave Pickrell, is the one who sort of not brought the technique over, but revived this old technique over in the US, and he applied it directly in Hill Rock, upstate New York by Encrem. And it does work. It does work, and he's proved that it can be done, and it's very interesting. It is very interesting. But let's remember one thing: if it says bourbon, no matter what, it has to be a brand new barrel, right? So one way or another, you've got the law on your side, because the law only calls for a substantial amount of time, right? If you're not in Kentucky and that's calling for 1 year minimum of aging, if you just want to say bourbon, you don't care about straight, well, it could just be for a few months, could be for a few weeks. It could even be for a few days if you really want to stretch it. And you can call it bourbon. And then you can do what you want with this bourbon. And you can transfer it, whether it's a Solera system or it's another sort of system. You can transfer it into a barrel that was not made of American oak. Let's not forget that the regulations do not call for American oak. It calls for brand new charred oak barrel. It could be Hungarian oak. It could be Mongolian oak, Japanese oak, But it never really made sense in the tradition of making whiskey in the US. It would never make sense to use other oak species. As a matter of fact, American oak is quite easy to use. It grows fast. It grows a lot faster than European oak species because of its almost lack of tannins. You don't have to follow the veins of the wood. You can just quarter saw it and that's it, right? And therefore, even if you go back 100 years ago, American oak was already shipped over to Spain and Portugal and Italy in order to contain wines over there. So American oak is beautiful, right? American oak with all this beauty, and nonetheless, maybe is not satisfying enough, very simply because, well, we have demanding palates nowadays, and you need to show your products differently from your competitors.
And they are looking at innovations and how they are going to innovate. And that leads me to the topic of the different barrel, and especially like the finish, the cask finish. This is the big things that we are seeing at the moment.
Right.
So what do you think about that?
I think innovation, no matter what, is absolutely needed to keep this business going. It's that simple. A category of product can only guarantee itself future if it knows how to move with the world. You can't really be stuck in the old days. You have to remain true to your history. You have to remain true to your identity and what your customers know of you, certainly. But, whether you're looking at Louis Vuitton or simple cheesemakers, they do follow the trends, and they may have 300 years of tradition. They may still be sourcing the very best ingredients from here or there, but they have to innovate. They have to innovate to keep it interesting for themselves. They have to innovate so that they can guarantee that they'll be the ones taking the space on that shelf in the liquor store or behind the bar in a restaurant bar, right? But also because they need to keep that consumer happy. And the consumer is not fixed in his or her own way. A consumer will change. You were really hooked on Jack Daniels when you were 21, and God knows you've evolved. I'm not saying Jack Daniels is a product for the younger kind, but all I'm saying is that it's beautifully made in its simplicity. As you grow older, your palate changes. You're looking for stronger flavors, for enjoying more of the acidity and the bitterness and the savory over the sweet and the simple. It's just how we are. And then at some point in your life, as you grow older, you may even go back to the sweet and easy. Guess what? Because you've lost already some sense of smell and taste. That's the reality of human beings aging with time. You do not exactly smell nor taste as good as you did when you're 75, such as you were when you were 25. It's that simple. So we do change. Our palates change, and the brands have to change themselves. There's a lot to say about the amazing integrity that all of those big brands, all of those bourbon makers have. They want to stick to what they're known for. They have that consistency. But can we blame them for coming up with a brand extension? Purists will say, oh, well, they're just trying to catch this segment of the market, or they're just trying to follow the trend. They're riding the wave of this and that. Finishing is just one of the techniques that can be used. Some producers don't go for it. Others have been dabbling with it a little bit, and some have embraced it. There's something that is very easy. The law calls for that finishing to be said on the label. You need to stipulate on your bottle that it is finished, right? You can't just put Kentucky straight bourbon and this is it. And then you taste it and it's very strange. It's very different. And you feel like something was added to it. Well, first of all, to call it bourbon, nothing can add it to it. You cannot flavor your bourbon, right? You can make a cucumber vodka and you'll be proud to put cucumber on the label. But if your bourbon is so caramelly and praline, well, that's just because of what happened during maturation. It's because of all these things that have been extracted during maturation. It's because of all those climate conditions and all that, right? So it's a very natural product that you cannot tamper with. And it's a beautiful thing that you can sort of play with the bourbon by transferring it after an otherwise traditional maturation in a brand new charred oak barrel into different casks. Now, can you source tradition? Can you source a sherry finish in the history of bourbon making? Well, it's hard to prove. But the reality is that a lot of wine barrels were coming from Spain at some point, and like all barrels that had been containing so many other goods, they would have been reused until they fell apart and until they would be remade into smaller barrels, maybe, or arranged with other staves from other barrels and remade into a barrel, becoming some sort of Frankenstein barrels. But that was the life of a barrel. To an extent, it's still the life of a barrel. Not in the U.S. to call it bourbon, but in the rest of the world it is.
So let's talk about still. I have one question on bourbon, focus on bourbon, and which is like the pairing with food. So I have one listener for the podcast. His name is Dylan, and he is asking the question. So how do you suggest to pair bourbon with food? Because since it's strong flavors, so what works well?
Well, it's strong flavors. You're right. So, I remember a few years ago talking about bourbon and playing with bourbon and food over in France. And then I've always been a bit different. Okay, I get it. But it was I was a bit of a heretic, to them. And until bourbon was consumed in greater amounts, and France is actually quite a big country for bourbon consumption, and it's so easy to pair bourbon with food, not all food, right? For me, it is best when there is either already a great deal of sweetness or a great deal of fat. Now, for some reason, I'm one of very few people who love to pair a bourbon, if not cask strength, at least a higher strength, 96 or above, 96 proof or above, with a Jamón Ibérico de Bellota, because there is so much depth, richness with Jamón Ibérico de Bellota that I think is the perfect complement. None of those, the bourbon nor this specially cured ham from pigs who were only raised on a beautiful diet of acorns, will be doing negative to the other. It's just the bourbon complements the Jamón Ibérico de Bellota and vice versa. It's just you got to take your time, right? You can't just go back to back one with the other. It's a lot easier if you're in a rush, and we're all in a rush because this is how modern society is commanding us to work and live. But you can go straight at chocolate and enjoy a great variety of chocolate, from milk chocolate to very dark chocolate to the bitter chocolate, and with a variety of bourbons. Some bourbons are drier than others, some are sweeter than others. Some have more vanilla in them than others. You'll find spicy bourbons. Is it because of the rye or because it was aged for a lot longer? I'm not sure. Whichever that is, there is, no matter what, a chocolate that will be ideal for it. You can just go as simple as a praline chocolate candy and a Maker's Mark, right? Maker's Mark remains a very good, soft, round, easy whiskey. And I'm not saying this in any negative way at all. This is the ideal everyday bourbon, I do believe. And when you're not about to sit down and have a chocolate conversation for 3 hours with your geeky friends about the very origins of this chocolate, then from the cocoa pods that were harvested in Nicaragua or over that particular mountain, you just into the enjoyment of it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with milk chocolate, praline, Bourbon. That's just purely beautiful. And
but you're not talking about the spicy food, because I do really enjoy tasting or having a glass of bourbon with, like food that has a kick, and maybe like Asian, food. It could be Korean, food and so on. I think it goes very well with it.
Yeah, I'm with you, but you see, in a lot of Asian food, especially when it gets a bit spicy, but even without being spicy, there is a mastering of fat in their dishes that is just the right complement. And those barbecue sauces of theirs and their soy-based marinades, there's so much depth in there that you find the depth in the bourbon as well, or in the rye whiskey. So I like a cask strength or barrel proof when I'm going that way. So you can definitely go savory there. God knows bacon is just bourbon's best friend, right? But if you do that Korean barbecue, absolutely. I mean, just marinate your already cooked pork belly in some sort of a soy sauce. Throw a little bit of rye whiskey in there, not for too long because then it's going to be too whiskey-like. And then just sear it very quickly in a cast iron pan, and it's heavenly with a cast strength bourbon. So absolutely perfect. That's for the savory side. I like when we're playing with coriander and different kinds of pepper. And I like when I find Indian notes, for example. Indian cooking has a lot of very interesting spices. And from that coriander to clove and to pepper and spices that have more flavor than kick, it's just, it really, really, really works. But again,
you will do with bourbon or you do with rye with that?
Well, I do with both, but when I do it with bourbon, I definitely want a higher strength. Or I want to make sure it's one.
So what do you mean higher strength? That will mean what, like 100 and
like
more?
92, 96, 100,
okay.
110. And remember that a few very high proof bourbons and rye whiskeys will be at high proof, but you won't really feel it. And I'm not saying that because maybe, you've seasoned your palate, but very simply because it is so well matured that the strength is part of the beauty. Instead of playing against your taste buds, it accompanies the richness of the whiskey. It carries the complexity of the whiskey. I'm thinking of this Pikesville rye, for example, 110 proof. That's a 6-year-old rye at 110 proof that really doesn't need any water, no ice or anything. I'm not going to pillory you if you're putting one of those in it, but certainly it doesn't need it. And
I drink I drink my bourbon or rye neat, but I've seen a lot of people, that's why I was asking the question before. I just want to ask you, do you think that you have the largest selection of whiskey in New York City?
In New York City, definitely. Yes. Yeah. And for bourbon in particular, I want to say that our sister location is even topping us. Copper and Oak in the Lower East Side is top.
Yeah.
Brandy Library's selection. But we always try to buy some bourbons as well at auctions. New York State licensed auctioneers, whenever they have those auctions, we try to bid. We don't always win, but we've got a few gems here and there, and we don't always put them on the menu right away. We like to hold them a little bit, just take them out of the reserve and put them on the shelf and in the menu at the right time. You have to keep checking us out.
Question about like the new generation. It says, and you can read everywhere that millennials and Gen Z are drinking less for a variety of reasons. And we heard as well that it poses like major challenges for the spirit industry in the long term. What do you think about this? Do you see that like the young generation coming less at the Brandy Library or the other place you have?
On the contrary, what they don't do as much as they would do in the past is coming to the same place over and over and having the same drink over and over just because it satisfies that part of the brain that likes consistency and surety, a sense of safety in their habits, right? And I don't want to say this is a thing of the past, but certainly the younger generation realizes that life is way too short to keep yourself in that box. So they do go to many more places than one. They like many more places than one, and they also like all sorts of whiskeys. And this is why the bourbon producers have to be thanked a lot for, because they've been accompanying this trend, and they've been selecting barrels that show different flavor profiles and bottling those different bourbons so that the younger generation can be satisfied with their curiosity. It's very important to satisfy your curiosity. I do believe that variety is choice, I guess, is a spice of life. I think it is needed, and unlike other categories, other spirits producers, the bourbon people have definitely seen it coming, and they've reacted quickly enough And the beauty of it is that most of them could expand on their production. And because it doesn't take that long to age a proper bourbon, they could adjust pretty quickly to the needs of the market. But I don't see this changing drinking population as a challenge for us. On the contrary, we are out there to show the beautiful variety of spirits and bourbons and ryes. So for us, it works. It really works. We want people to try. And look, we're now up to 48 different tasting flights in our menu. So, and it takes time. Believe me, a tasting flight is not something that you just come out with in 2 seconds. It's comes in a box. It's 6 glasses in a box. It's 6 bottles to open and to carefully pour in a box. And there's a paper underneath and there's another paper above. And every time we change one of them, we have to change the tasting notes, and it's a change in the POS, and it's a new print of the menu. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Absolutely.
But that's
true that you have added a lot. I mean, compared to several years back,
right.
Coming to the Brandy Library where there was, there were still, a series of flights, but now it's a lot. And so that's your way of reacting and proposing something for the new generation.
Yeah. And we're now working, and we constantly change those flights sort of because we want people to be experiencing what's new as well.
Yeah, sure, and come back. Sure.
Exactly. And we always invite the producers over, every week. We've got at least one, if not 2 public tastings, whether at Brandy Library or at Copper and Oak, where producers, the master blenders or the owners of the distilleries, the distillery managers will come and sample their spirits. And you're in front of the person who makes it and who can explain everything to you. So we want the product to be the only third party there between the consumer and the producer. And,
okay. Can you find those program on your website? When you
you've got to have your email address. We send
okay,
emails,
sure.
and we go by social media as well with Facebook.
So subscribe to your newsletter. That's the solution. Absolutely.
That's what it is. Yes.
So can you tell me what's the Spirit Network, and can you talk a little bit about your involvement with it?
Spirits Network is I was about to say a little bit of a revolution, but it's a lot more than that. It is the revolution, and it's going to take a few weeks, maybe for people to realize. But we tweaked take on Food Network to be applied to spirits. And we added an instant shop ability to it. So you've got the ability to purchase your fine spirits right there on your phone, any smartphone, or on your smart TV, or on your desktop. It's spiritsnetwork.com as well. And because you're watching shows, it's a huge amount of programming pieces. Whether we have filmed them ourselves or we've acquired the content, trusted sources, things that we've tweaked and helped in the making will tell you how gin is made and why this bourbon tastes like this and another. We partnered with amazing people in the industry, whether it's in Kentucky or over in England or in France or Mexico, and we're basically showing the beauty of this world of fine spirits. So we're out for you to discover the heritage, the culture, and the tastes. So
it's both like an educational and a shopping channel, correct?
Right. And I want to say even more so than educational. I mean, you know how much I love to educate the palates on all things spirited. It's entertaining. It's a lot of entertainment. So you can be watching how to make an old fashioned, but it's going to be a funny one, and it's going to be quick. Or you can just dive into the making of malt whiskey, and it's going to last quite a few minutes, and we really want your attention. So you've got a little bit for all palates and all eyes, so to speak.
Okay, and you can shop some specific, let's say, launches or release of certain spirits that you will not able to find, in your store?
Because of our partnerships, we have a special access to the right stuff. And when I say the right stuff, I mean the limited editions, special releases, what just arrived on the market, and we'll be offering that to you. Now, it's a paying membership. Right now, we've got a promotion going on. I didn't know I would be doing the promotion of the current discounts, but if you don't go for the $1 a month, it is normally a $9.99 a month to get the ability to buy. And I mean, look, I get my bottles within 2 hours in New York City. It's not absolutely everywhere like this, and we're looking to expand, and it's going fast. But you can get your fine spirit right away. We can also curate that membership for you, as in you don't have to worry about anything. And once a month, whether you're paying $99.99 a month or $149.99 a month, we will send you that fancy bottle that we know you like because, well, you filled out that flavor profile and you told us what you like. So we're in to do the shopping for you. We curate that experience. So Spirits Network is just so innovative technique to put the producers directly in charge of understanding the consumers, and for the consumers to get what they like right away. That will never replace going to a bar or a restaurant and talk about this particular flavor profile of a bourbon with your favorite bartender or your spirit sommelier if you come to Brandy Library or Copper and Oak or other places. But, you know, there is this amazing possibility to learn right there, right on. And while you're having a relaxing time or while you're with your friends at work or at home, it just makes a lot of sense. Let's face it, a big part of the consumption of fine spirits, just like wines and beers and food, is now taking place at home. So we want to bring the producers and the wonderful products to your home. Just like you've got those food subscription boxes, you've got this fine spirits boxes.
So, Flavien, we have been talking for a long time. You're really a passionate guy, and you know, obviously, tremendously, a lot on, about spirits. And it's always a pleasure to, to come to the Bourbon Library. But before we end the session here, I would like to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. When it comes to spirits, what is your spirit of choice?
I don't have
Flavien. You don't have one?
I don't have.
I know it's not vodka, though.
It's not vodka, yeah. So let's go by the negative. It is not vodka. It is not vodka. But if I find myself in the right place in Ukraine or Poland, I will absolutely enjoy a vodka in the right company. And because that vodka will actually have a texture and a taste and something to it. But not here, not in the US, where vodka has to be tasteless and odorless and colorless.
Okay.
See, I did it again. It was rapid fire question. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Have you ever thought of having yourself like a distillery and producing, some of the spirits, yourself?
Sure. In theory, I believe there's nothing more satisfying than seeing a creation grow and be something that the public likes, clearly. But I know, because I've traveled so much and because I've been in this industry for now 25 years in the hospitality industry, I also know that you just don't come up with any product and be proud of it and people to really like it for the long run overnight. It takes years, it takes decades. That's why I salute all these craft distillers who have the courage to do so, because it's a tough dream to believe in, right? But if you have the courage, if you're bold with this very true American spirit, you can do it, absolutely. But people say it's very difficult to build a bar or a restaurant and to still have it after a few years, right? Brandy Library is going to be celebrating 15 years in a couple of weeks. It's enough of a challenge on its own, and Copper and Oak is my other baby. And look, I've got a wife, a son, 2 bars,
sure, and the Spirit Network, and
20 or so amazing employees. That are the one who actually make it happen every day. They're the ones who translate all this passion. They're all passionate and wonderful people. So I got a lot on my plate,
Okay. Is Pappy Van Winkle just a marketing story?
It's not just a marketing story. It's also beautiful stuff. And there's no effort in marketing, as a matter of fact. This is a product that got successful almost on its own, or in the hands of people who have been buying it and collecting it. Ask Julian Van Winkle what he thinks of it, and he'll tell you that this is really a silly thing going on. But it happens to be an amazing bourbon, too.
What was the most interesting class that you have delivered yourself at the Brandy Library?
Oh, that's a good question. I am not sure. It's all about the attendance, right? It's all about the people you've got in the room. And I always have pleasure, whether we're talking about tequila and mezcal or Japanese whiskey or bourbon and rye whiskey. I do not know. I don't remember.
So let's talk about, there's one coming about the impact and the influence of oak. So can you tell us a little bit what is this one about?
Yeah, so we're taking North American whiskey in a variety of iterations because those are matured in different oak species. And this one is going to be a little technical, but no matter what, it's going to be the occasion to taste new whiskeys, different whiskeys. Some of them that are absolutely impossible to get, others that are very easy to get and yet that are gems that people don't realize how amazing they are. Some single barrels, some not, but definitely something about the origin. Look, I'm trying to put terroir in the mind of not just consumers, but in the mind of producers as well. So if the consumers pay more attention to the very DNA of the whiskey they're drinking, whether it's bourbon or rye or even Scotch whiskey, it's going to help the producers pay attention to what the market needs are. And then in turn, they will pay more attention to the raw material. And in turn, maybe they'll revive some heirloom varieties of corn. And maybe just those guys over in our Empire State of New York pay more attention to the little farmers who are helping the distillers revive some heirloom variety of rye or wheat and go non-GMO and pay more attention to the water and their carbon footprint and be careful with their pollution and all this. Making whiskey actually takes a toll on Mother Nature. You're using a lot of water. You have a lot of byproducts. You're putting your product in a glass. There's the glass making of it. There's a cork. There's a label. That's paper. There's so much of it. There's the distribution of it. Bringing it to your door. How many doors the bourbon bottles have to go through in order to end up in your glass. A lot. So there's a lot of thinking that producers have to do in order to one, respect the raw materials, and two, be open about what they do and clearly educate their consumers with very truthful information and showing them how it's done.
So what's your favorite classic cocktail?
When the guys want to send me home, they're offering me an old-fashioned. And I've got to say, it used to be a sidecar when we opened Brandy Library for a very brandy purpose. And, it was all about whiskey to begin with, but I always wanted to show brandies as often as I could, right? So sidecar was our number one cocktail, and it got pushed to the side by the old-fashioned.
Okay.
Gotta say 5
Traditional old-fashioned or with a twist?
Well, we're pretty classic when it comes to cocktail, although classic has different takes here, but we're using Rittenhouse rye. We're using rye in our old-fashioned. And maybe our little twist is the fact that we're buying fresh cherries, just about 200 pounds a year, and we soak them in barrels with an orange syrup in small quantity and a lot of bourbon. And that's the cherry that you're going to get with your slice of orange and a long ribbon in that big glass. It's just beauty. The old-fashioned is such a simple pleasure. Yes, this is what I crave at the end of a long day. The simplicity of an old-fashioned.
Thank you very much again, Flavien. It was great to spend some time with you. And I'm looking forward to my next visit to the Brandy Library, and hopefully you'll be around.
Hopefully I'll find you at that oak exploration class.
Yeah, you might. Okay.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thanks again.
If you liked this episode with Flavien Desoblin from the Brandy Library and Cooper & Oak in Manhattan, please share it with friends, as I always welcome new listeners to the show. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to receive the information about future new episodes. In 2 weeks, my guest will be Chef Gabriel Crowther from the 2 Michelin star restaurant on Bryant Park in Manhattan. I see you in 2 weeks, and until then, remember that people who love to eat are always the best people.
Thanks for listening to Flavors Unknown. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review. Find the show notes at flavorsunknown.com. And if you want to join the Flavors Unknown community, search Flavors Unknown on Instagram and Twitter.